My name is Bhanu Rekha. I'm the managing editor with Geospatial Media and Communications, an organization working worldwide to spread awareness about geospatial technology and especially in land sector. And I'll be moderating for today's panel discussion. Land, as we all agree, is the most important natural resource and impacts our well-being in multitude of ways. History is all about war or for supremacy over land, and man had always had an emotional connect with land. Probably the reason why managing land is so complex and complicated, it rarely runs to any rational and dispassionate discussion. In the book titled The Mystery of Capital, I'm sure many of you might have heard or read about it, Hernando de Soto presented the theory that an unified legal system of property rights is the catalyst that releases the capital value of land. By comparing the experience of Western nations with that of many developing countries in South America, De Soto demonstrated that secure land title and valuation of land and property rights are the fundamental drivers to economic stability and growth. In fact, there is a very strong empirical support for De Soto's theory. The International Property Rights Index of 2015 emphasizes the great economic differences between countries with strong property rights and those without. The 2015 index emphasizes the necessity of property rights for creating a free market and driving economic growth, while recognizing also that property rights are, first of all, a matter of human rights. However, if you look at the present scenario of the world's around 6 billion land parcels, 70 to 75% are not formally registered. And in fact, in many developing countries, typically only 20% of the total land parcel is formally registered and the rest informal. In countries like Haiti, 95% of land transactions are not registered, and land records are still in paper format in many countries. And if you see, even countries who have initiated the formal land administration, it's just about 50 countries across the world. So land records and land reforms continue to be mainstay and of discussion to unlock the economic value of land. The United Nations 2015 revision, in fact, estimates that world population would be touching 8.5 billion in 2030 and 9.7 billion in 2050. So it'll be increasingly difficult for nations to ensure food security, adequate housing, and efficient transportation and infrastructure to support the growing population without accurate land information and well-defined land administration systems in place. But fortunately for us, information and communication technology is a great enabler and equalizer to bridge this gap, and the latest developments in mobile, platform, and sensor technologies, computing power, infrastructure, and the ability, the flexibility offered by the cloud are providing reliable, quick, and cost-effective answers to the land issues. Well, ladies and gentlemen, to discuss more about the latest technology tools available for land administration, the benefits that one could get from these technologies, and also the challenges involved, we have an eminent panel of experts today. So allow me to introduce Ms. Iona Bouvier. At USAID, Iona Bouvier plays a leading role in developing, piloting, and testing innovative geospatial programs and activities that improve land governance, land management, and land use planning. Iona has over 15 years of experience in developing geospatial analysis and technology solutions for international development programs. She has a master's degree in remote sensing and GIS for development and environment from Clark University, Worcester, MA. We also have Lisa K. Lewis. Lisa is a senior business analyst with Tax and Accounting Unit of Thomson Reuters, which focuses on the Momentum land management systems. She is an expert in land administration and cadasters with 20 years of experience in GIS implementation and training. Ms. Lewis' expertise in land administration has been instrumental in many international projects for Thomson Reuters, including in Uganda, Nigeria, Dominica, and Jamaica. She has worked in both the government and private sector in Jamaica and the British Virgin Islands. On the panel, we also have today Frank Pitchell, Cadasta Foundation. Frank Pitchell is Chief Programs Officer and co-founder at Cadasta Foundation, where he works with partners to implement programs for collecting, documenting, and managing land rights on the Cadasta platform. He is a land administration specialist with experience designing, managing, and implementing land-related projects with a technology focus around the globe. Mr. has worked with the private sector programs while based in West Africa, as well as designing and managing programs as part of the E3 Land Office USAID. So thank you, gentlemen and ladies, for joining. Yona, may I request you to make your intervention and comments, please?
Sure. Thank you very much. And thank you to our audience, both online and here in Call DC. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the exciting technology solutions, some of which USAID is currently piloting. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what is the fundamental problem that a lot of these solutions are seeking to address. And in most agrarian society, land is clearly an essential, a critical resource. And yet a lot of rural communities lack the means to do something as simple as identifying and quantifying their land resources. The most important resource cannot be quantified. Even when communities have the option to secure their tenure to a certificate, even when the legal framework is there, they oftentimes have to rely on very costly, time-intensive surveying methods that sometimes are not reliable, sometimes do not fit into a sustainable system. Here you see a picture on the screen and online of a mobile application. Before this was possible using mobile technology, the information would be captured through the traditional means to a one-time surveying, which would be oftentimes just recorded in a hard copy and left in an office, which leads to challenges in updating the system. One of the fundamental problems that new updating technology are addressing right now is reducing the time, increasing efficiencies with respect to just identifying and demarcating a piece of land. So that is really a fundamental problem. With respect to rural communities, and because I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the solutions that USAID is piloting with respect to mobile technology. So some of the communities may be able to offer certificates. So some of the technology solutions may have to address the whole workflow of identifying, demarcating the land, resolving any potential conflicts around a parcel of land, and eventually issuing a certificate and maintaining that information. And I also want to mention how important it is to address the issue of reliability of data quality, because that builds trust in the system. And so that, I think that's a very, very important challenge when implementing new technology solutions in the land sector. So I want to just mention that some of the technology solutions that are being currently piloted are definitely enabled by advances in technology. And Ban already mentioned advances in respect to data storage. There are now options for cloud storage that were not available before. When I did a lot of community mapping, I did a lot of field work, and a lot of the data storage options that are available today were not available just 5-6 years ago. So advances in technology really make possible improve efficiencies with respect to identifying and demarcating land. You're seeing on the screen some of the examples of community-driven, if you want, technology solutions, and that is done through training of community members who are able to identify and demarcate the land. It's important to mention that that's done really in a local context. So that is done through or in partnership with the local surveyors, with the local government offices. So it's not replacing necessarily the traditional surveying methods, but it is improving efficiencies. So that's very important. That's something that I believe is very exciting about the new technologies that are available. So USAID is currently piloting such mobile solutions in Tanzania and Zambia. In Tanzania, specifically, I think you're seeing an example from Zambia here. All of the solutions are under the umbrella of mobile applications to secure tenure, because whether it is demarcating the land, such as the case in Zambia, and an example on the screen, or issuing a certificate, so the entire workflow of identifying land, storing information, verifying that information, resolving any conflicts, and eventually issuing a certificate. That is the case in Tanzania with our mobile pilot there. So I mentioned also, I mentioned the issue of data, sustainability of data quality. I also want to refer to the issue of the accuracy, because that comes up a lot with respect to the feasibility of some of the new technology solutions and how those could work in a local context. And that is a very important issue. It's definitely still a challenge in some parts of Africa because the accuracy that can be achieved in the United States or in Western Europe remains a challenge in many developing countries. So I think, well, looking forward, I believe we will see improvements in the accuracy of some of the smartphones, the GPS receivers on some of the smartphones. So that is something that I believe will really improve and provide more options with respect to specifically mobile technology. So I think also very important is that this type of technology solution is not a one-time effort. It really has to build into a dynamic system. I think that's something that's often forgotten, mainly because the task of identifying part plan is a relatively steep effort. However, this information needs to live in a or my panelists for about it and maintaining the trust in the system. So with that, I can turn it over to the other panelists.
Yes, thank you so much, Yana, for making your comments. You're banged right on in introducing very new tools and how effective these new tools are becoming for the land and rights issues. May I now request Lisa to make her points.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today. Special thank you to the USAID Land East Office team, E3 Office team, for organizing, and for Benu for moderating the session. This morning, I'll share with you the past, the present, and what I see as the future of technology for land administration based on the experience I've gathered working in vastly different environments. My work at Thomson Reuters includes the installation of new land management systems, the maintenance and support of existing systems, and the training of local government officials and technicians in using these tools. In some ways, you might say I'm basically the middleman, middle woman between the customer and the technology team. It is important to remember that only about 29% of the Earth's surface is land. Once we take away polar regions, we're basically down to 10 or 15% that is habitable. Land is therefore a scarce yet vital resource with a rapidly increasing global population. Even more important is land tenure and security, which is vital to food security and sustainable development, particularly in the less developed regions due to rising population and climate change. One thing I've experienced as a professional is how much faster we can get things done, be it in the office or in the field with the use of technology. Despite my relatively short career, technology has really changed what is possible in terms of managing data on land. 20 years ago, when I first started working in Jamaica, it took months to process land transactions for land registration and valuation. Even to transfer registry applications from the valuation office in Montego Bay to the central office in Kingston would have taken weeks for the actual property file to make its way from one office to the other, and then to manually work its way to the land registry office from desk to desk. And those of you who've been to Jamaica, you know it's not that big. Today, we've been able to scale the operations of government in very profound ways so that the offices can process way more transactions within a much faster time with fewer staff. This has led the National Land Agency of Jamaica to be more secure in that they're better able to fulfill their mandates. It has also led them to be more sustainable. And this results in more of their operating revenue being used for making investments in technology and capacity building. In a very short period of time, land administration processes have jumped from the paper age to the digital age, whereby most of these processes have been automated. So what used to take months now takes days, or even down to minutes, depending on the type of transaction. For all our advancements in technology, we also recognize that technology is at best a tool. If managed correctly, it can be a great asset. If managed incorrectly or in a way that is not secure, sustainable, or scalable, in terms of integration of data in a regional or national system, it can be harmful and detrimental to future land management initiatives. What I'm most excited about at Thomson Reuters is that our ability as an enterprise solution partner to deliver technology that remedies various scenarios in different implementations and provide a solid foundation that goes alongside a country or jurisdiction. Let me provide an example of this. I've seen in Africa technology being deployed that goes beyond its originally designed purpose. These software tools were deployed for a relatively straightforward task, to do inventory and map land rights. And this job was well accomplished with this tool. The problem, however, was that once all the data was created, persons continued to do things with their property, such as purchase, transfer, and gift land. In other words, persons sold property, persons bought property, some even use it for collateral. The software tool was not suited to manage multiple transaction types, so the system eventually failed. Terabytes of data collected on millions of properties and applicants had gone from a living registry of the fabric of ownership to a slowly decaying and ever less valuable, unreliable set of information. This is the problem as related to why having sustainable, secure, and scalable technology is so critical. In our professional services team, we are very focused on being a technology solution partner to assist governments address the issue of land tenure and security. We have also got to keep in mind that there are various levels of technical skills and local conditions across each region. Part of the solution must include how we develop capacity, provide technical support, and assist in public outreach activities for our customers. It is never just about a software system or a software tool. The need for timely implementation of desired solutions is of paramount importance. No longer can we wait indefinite periods to implement a solution for government. Rather, we need to be agile enough to deliver timely solutions built on quality standards for use with multiple governments with similar needs. Here's another example. I spent most of 2014 living and working in Plateau State, Nigeria. I was working with the state government to implement a land registry and integrated cadastre solution. This was the second deployment we'd done in Nigeria. The first one was for Cross River State, and that project was implemented in 3 years. In this one, we were using a similar system. It took us only 9 months. We had also trained and certified our local partner, TechBridge Limited, to assist in technical support and training. My point here is that by leveraging the experience in one state in Nigeria, we were able to deliver a solution in a quarter of the time. In the future, technology will be advancing in so many ways. And at the same time, there's an exponential increase in the amount of information and ways to capture more data faster. Think about this tremendous convergence of mobile phones, satellite, cloud computing, mapping apps, and drones. This is really an exciting time. Two trends we'll see that will dynamically shape the industry in the next couple of years are cloud-based technologies and open data standards. Both provide the opportunity to really scale operations for government. Out of our Australia office, we're offering a cloud-based land valuation solution. This has assisted smaller government jurisdictions harness technology without having to invest in their own IT infrastructure. It has also allowed smaller offices to access to a more robust system that they couldn't have previously afforded themselves. The second trend is the need to adopt open data standards. This would allow for the industry to rally around the ability to exchange data from one system to another without having the pain of converting data from different formats. For government, one of the most difficult, time-consuming, and expensive tasks is data conversion. If we as an industry had really technical standards that would allow for interoperability, it would reduce this pain tremendously and lower the risk of failure. And finally, let us step away from the technology bit for a second. What we're trying to address are problems affecting global regions, and especially less developed ones, as related to land tenure, and by extension, agriculture and sustainable development. One has to remember, in most of these countries, land is the only asset used for sustenance, and it's passed on from generation to generation. Technology should never be seen as a cure-all for the world's problems. Sometimes you get into cultural issues as well as technology cannot solve. But we must stay focused on developing solutions that are sustainable, scalable, and secure enough to be able to address the uniqueness of each country that we deliver to. At the same time, becoming dependent on the internet, however, it is the way we operate and deliver, but this is important to remember and keep in mind the disparity in this technology in various parts of the globe, given a weak infrastructure. At Thomson Reuters, we never try to take for granted a Western perspective, but rather we incorporate knowledge and experience from our operations around the globe to best influence how we deliver our systems. Also, a key to our success is ensuring that we support a partner for life, as opposed to a short-term vision or project. Take a longer-term approach designed to meet the needs for today, tomorrow, and the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for beautifully enumerating the past, present, and the future trends and how technology has really enabled and cut down on many aspects of the cost or speed or experience, several aspects of flexibility that technology has brought in. Thank you so much. May I request Frank to make his introductory comments and remarks?
Well, good morning to you all, and thanks again for joining us here today. I'd also like to start off by thanking the USAID Land Office both for organizing this event, as well as their support from the office and their partners in testing and piloting technology for land administration. And also a quick thank you to UKAID and Omidyar for their support of the Cadasta Foundation. Lisa, I certainly appreciate your comments, and I think you'll see some similar themes in my own, probably given some shared experience we have. Various recent advancements offer the opportunity to utilize game-changing, cost-effective, scalable approaches that might make the lofty goals outlined in the voluntary guidelines a reality for men and women around the globe. We've seen recently how the utilization of technology, when implemented in conjunction with revised business processes, fit-for-purpose approaches, and sound governance, has the potential to radically decrease unit cost of land registration and allow for significant efficiency gains. This was the case in Rwanda, where with DFID support, 10 million parcels were registered over the course of a few years at a per unit cost of less than $10. For every success story like Rwanda, however, there are examples in other countries where millions of donor dollars or national dollars have been spent to improve the land sector, with results that are nowhere near as positive. And even in Rwanda, there remains questions regarding how the data will be kept current. How will we ensure that citizens register subsequent transactions in light of the time involved, the high costs, and the perceived benefit of registration? Of new approaches and technologies is critical if we're going to close the gap in regards to the estimated 70% of the world which lack documented formal rights to the land they live on. The global community of land professionals will need to accept a change in the status quo and will need to pilot and, where successful, implement these new technologies at scale in order to break the cycle of marginally successful land programs. Some of the primary tools that have fundamentally changed the land sector in recent years include the commercialization of computers, the GPS, and high-resolution satellite imagery. From that perspective, we can look at the year 2000 as being a bit of a turning point. Computers were becoming more common, particularly in emerging economies. The US government discontinued the use of selective availability, which was basically a dumbing down of the GPS signal. And the QuickBird 2 satellite began collecting sub-meter imagery for commercial purposes. It's important to note that while these technologies are just now entering the mainstream, there are many in the traditional land sector that still question their utility. More recently, USAID has been on the forefront of piloting technical applications, and when combined with rigorous impact evaluations, they'll yield evidence regarding the potential utility of these tools. This includes the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs or drones, for collecting orthorectified and georeferenced images of localized areas. USAID, with the support of USGS, used drones for mapping artisanal diamond mines in Guinea, a country, like many tropical countries, that is notoriously difficult to collect imagery of, given persistent cloud cover. The very high resolution imagery was then used to create maps with the community. The community was able to review, annotate, and validate the maps within hours of data collection. And it's important to note that the community played a role in data collection. They weren't passive observers who merely had the data collected by a satellite or aerial photography and then delivered at some point in the distant future. Recent work by the Land Alliance has expanded on this approach by having community members place boundary markers prior to imagery acquisition. The use of smartphones for documenting land claims, which Yona mentioned earlier, including spatial, photographic, and testimonial information by local citizens, as opposed to expensive and difficult to access land professionals, which can be extremely difficult to access in rural parts of the world, has been tested through the MAST program in Tanzania. This pilot has proven that information collected using mobile phones can not only strengthen tenure security, but has been the basis of government confirmation of formal rights and issuance of certificates of customary rights of occupancy, something that wasn't even envisioned in the program design. The MAST pilot also proved to be a powerful example of how land administration processes could be taken out of the hands of the traditional actors and democratized, allowing citizens using readily available tools to collect and manage land rights information themselves. While USAID and others in the donor community have been working to test technological tools, the real proof of applicability can be seen by the number of organizations learning from and building upon these pilots. We can now see a number of both for and nonprofit organizations looking at mobile applications for collecting property rights, whether Landmap in Ghana, to the FAO in Uganda and Cambodia, to Suyo in Colombia, just to name a few. Mobile phone applications and UAVs are just the latest technologies to be applied to land rights and are now entering the mainstream, much as GPS, satellite imagery, and computers did a decade before. But what are the emergent technologies we can look at in the years to come? Will it be a global addressing system like that proposed by What 3 Words that will uniquely identify each 3 meters square on the face of the earth? Is it Bitcoin and its underlying technology, the blockchain, which is going to provide greater security in land transactions by utilizing a distributed database? Perhaps it will provide greater security, but I'd argue that it might be more appropriate for middle and high income countries where there's a baseline of useful data, as opposed to emerging economies where the real challenge lies in collecting the data in the first instance, resolving inevitable conflicts, and updating laws, policies, and processes. Could it be the utilization of near real-time like that with Planet Labs and its network of 100+ satellites that will be up by the end of this year, and that promise the ability to image the entire globe daily, albeit at a resolution of 3 to 5 meters. Imagine the ability to prove historical land use when one could literally roll back the clock daily on imagery and see when changes occurred. When was the initial occupancy? When did the boundaries start to shift? When and where was encroachment happening? Can they use that to demonstrate land use to government or investors? How about the use of open platforms for collecting, managing, and sharing of open data? We've seen the power of OpenStreetMap, which, by the way, is a virtual foundation with no paid staff members. Following the Earth this past April, 4,000 remote volunteers mapped over 13,000 miles of road and 110,000 buildings in just 48 hours after the earthquake, totaling over 4 million edits. This data was critical as first responders arrived on the scene, and we saw the White House launch a mapathon supporting this effort just weeks following. Similarly, we're working to develop our own platform for documenting property rights at Cadasta, which will allow for individuals and communities to document and manage their own land rights. Lastly, open data in itself, in the context of property rights, is gaining attention. It's only through publicizing land claims, be they concessions, state lands, private lands, indigenous lands, community lands, that a full picture can really be presented. The Open Knowledge Foundation recently included property rights in the Open Data Index for the first time, and we'll be building on that data set going forward. While open data in regards to land is a norm here in the US and much of the rest of the world, property information is largely inaccessible, either due to privacy laws or the reality of cumbersome and inefficient systems, if the systems exist at all. It's worth noting that property technology startups attracted $1.4 billion in investment last year. And for many of these startup companies, open data is the basis of their work. As a result, and as you can probably imagine, most of this investment has occurred in places where there's open data and property rights. Regardless of which of these tools ends up being scalable, it's critical to remember that while technology can be used as an effective means to more efficiently and transparently address land administration challenges, technology in itself is not a panacea. Tools must be technologically appropriate and fit for the purpose at hand. In some cases, that might mean pen and paper. In others, high-end, expensive, cutting-edge hardware. Technology cannot be used in isolation and is effective only when implemented in conjunction with capacity building of end users, business process reengineering, modernization of outdated regulations, policies, and laws. It is only then that the benefits of technology can be unlocked and allow for increased efficiency within land administration operations, while at the same time eliminating the opaque manner in which many land offices have operated, and allowing for data to become accessible and transparent to the general public. We are entering an age in which the barriers to entry into the formal system are constantly being eroded as technology becomes more and more accessible. No longer are the tools used to collect, record, and manage property rights information held solely in the hands of highly trained and expensive to access land professionals, such as notaries, lawyers, and surveyors, but instead they're becoming democratized and accessible to the population at large. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank, for bringing out the democratization of the technology and how the open data is enabling people, rather putting the power of data and their own land in their hands. So thank you so much for your remarks. I have one quick question to all the panelists, just to ignite the discussion. We have an array of tools, technology tools, starting from the land survey tools to the latest trends in the mobile, the UAVs, the LiDAR, and even the trend in open data for the entire value chain of the land administration system. In your experience, how has been, there is an argument always that the most perfect and the best way to do a land survey is by the land survey, and that most accurate information can be obtained. But that is a too time-taking process and an expensive process. But the latest technologies were pretty quick. But is there a compromise in terms of the quality, in terms of the reliability aspects? How do we balance between these two aspects, and how has been your experience in balancing these two? I mean, which tool to use and for what purpose? Yana, can I ask you for your quick comment?
Sure. I believe the notion of the fit for purpose is a very interesting one, because it really implies that the technology solutions are developed or adapted to the needs of in the case of a community or a country. So depending on the legal requirements, I can give the example of Tanzania, where there is a legal framework for customary land certificates, and the accuracy requirements are to be within 5 meters of accuracy. So in the case of Tanzania, for customary land tenure, as long as mobile technology solutions or the surveying team could prove that they stay within a 5-meter accuracy range, that is an acceptable technology solution to produce eventually a legal document. So the notion of fit for purpose is definitely a very interesting notion. It's very important for identifying the needs. So in terms of compromise, I don't know that we're really talking about the compromise. I think we're talking about balancing more the cost and the time requirement with respects to the technology, the human capacity building. I think both Lisa and Frank mentioned the importance of the capacity building, and I cannot emphasize that enough. I don't know if there's necessarily a compromise with respect to data quality. I believe that, especially if there's a legal requirement to be within a certain accuracy range, that has to be met. I believe the compromise is more on a cost and time efficiencies than on data quality.
Okay, great. Frank, would you like to enumerate with some example or something?
Sure.
Your point.
A little bit to add and to build on your comments, Yona, around fit for purpose. And certainly I think that was somewhat of an eye-opening paper that was released by the Federation of Surveyors on just that issue of fit for purpose, and represented perhaps a bit of a change perspective of surveyors, which are traditionally a conservative bunch. I'll be polite to my surveyor colleague. But really recognizing that the needs are not the same in your high-value urban versus your low-value rural. And a 5-meter accuracy might be completely appropriate in a low-value rural area where the cost simply isn't justified for that highly accurate survey. But conversely, in an urban area, you will need that highly accurate survey. So it's important for more governments to recognize that and adapt laws where needed to ensure that the data collection standards match the reality on the ground.
Okay, fantastic. Lisa, you're into
I'll
it.
join in with Frank. We're looking at 5 meters in terms of rural areas, because in Plateau that was the requirement. When we talk about fit for purpose, we have to encourage people to consider the overall cost of ownership. Right? So we have to hold them to exacting standards for us to be able to deliver to them.
Okay, great. I'm sure the audience have a lot of questions in their mind. The floor is now open to questions. Any questions for the panelists? Please.
So obviously the idea behind empowering people with,
Online audience.
Sure. So the idea is
It's going through the.
okay, cool. The idea is that this will allow people to keep their land, right? So I'm just wondering if there is, obviously this is very new, but is there documented evidence that this is holding up against corporate and government land grabs? Like, is documentation actually allowing people to fight against attempts by governments and corporations to buy or push them off of their land?
Any?
I don't know existing evidence about document one, just being able to demarcate your land, identify and publicize it, right? So democratizing the aspect of demarcating your land. The other one is the legal documentation about your land. I think that's possible in certain places and it's not possible in others yet. I believe both definitely help, especially rural communities, with respects to providing some security against the land grabs. Definitely, I believe both do, but with different nuances there, because of obviously a legal document is something that they could defend in a legal court. So I believe that there's nuances of.
Just to expand on that a little bit, I'd say it really varies country by country. One of the challenges we see is that oftentimes customary indigenous rights have never been documented, so they're not formally recognized. And that's more of a reflection of legal changes that need to be made. With much of the rural land often undocumented or documented in a poorly managed registry system that's very open to manipulation, there's plenty of potential for outsiders or even local elites to make the claim that there is no land registered or that they have a title that predates whatever's in the registry. So it gets back to that point of the need to have more complete data sets that are more open and accessible.
In Nigeria, you'll find that they're changing the way how they do tenure. They're moving customer to statutory. So when we implemented the system, we had to implement transactions to facilitate that purpose. So we change your customer tenure into statutory, and then you have that occupancy right and documents being produced.
Okay, great. Any more questions from the audience?
Thank you very much for the presentations. As someone that doesn't know too much about the technology and is just coming into it, it was a great kind of flash summary of everything that's out there. My question is about the open source technology and the balance between democratization, which means it's in the hands of many, and what kind of resistance you've found in governments that specifically would like more either authority or wouldn't like that authority or supervision taken away, if any.
First stab at that. I guess in regards to open source technology, our primary perspective at Cadasta Foundation is to use what works. Sometimes that is open source. Sometimes it might be proprietary. We build on an open source technology. That's the decision we made as an organization. In regards to resistance from governments, it's been an interesting, something I've been exposed to recently, particularly in regards to the point of cloud computing. And if you wanted to put data into the cloud, and oftentimes governments are still looking at that from an antiquated perspective of our land records are kept in our land office. That's where they must be in our country. But the reality oftentimes is that the infrastructure for technology is poor. So a server maintained, air conditioned, and out of the dust can be a challenge. And I'm sure, Lisa, you can speak to systems that have fallen over just because of that issue of maintenance. So I would like to see more of an openness by governments generally to cloud computing, so you can take some of that pressure of maintaining hardware and put it on the shoulders of others in places where it might be more appropriate to manage the data.
But then with that, you have to think about the technological advancements, because you have local capacity that's not really ready for something as cloud-based technology, right? So you have to also bear that in mind, because not everybody will say, okay, data in the cloud, and then they're rolling their eyes like, if we can't see it, it's not there. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure there are several questions coming from our online audience. Carol, would you mind sharing any questions for the panelists?
Sure, thank you very much. We have a number of questions from the online audience. I'm going to start actually with an interesting question from Professor John Unruh at McGill University, who is asking all the panelists to address the following. This technology, varieties of technologies that you've described are really interesting, but how does the technology engage with the statutory customary divide in land rights, and how might it engage with returning refugees who have no documentation? So really interesting, challenging question from Professor Unruh.
Yes, Lisa, Iana, would you like to take that?
I can take a first stab at it. So I found that question about the returning refugees to be very interesting, because I've seen some interesting examples actually looking at the historical imagery and trying to document previous land ownership and previous land occupancy using historical image, and I think that's That's definitely being done. Some of the records are there. In some cases, it might be very difficult to do, but I think it's providing an additional source of information, building that evidence base with respect to previous land ownership. So I think that's a very interesting question. Respects to the statutory or customary status, I believe it's part of the fit for purpose, right? It's whether we're working in a customary land tenure system, technology would have to address the requirements of that system, whether it is within the legal framework for the statutory land tenure or customary. I think it's part of that fit for purpose question.
I'd just say that once the governance is in place, then you apply the technology that would really assist in doing that, in fostering that historic view of the data or society itself. Because with our systems, we put in this lineage tag that allows you to roll back to see the changes of the property over a period of time. So with that customer tenure coming on stream, changed over into statutory, then you could really kind of have a handle on it.
Interesting. Any more questions, Carol?
I do actually. So a question from Michael Underwood, who notes smartphones have been used quite often in South Africa, primarily for market information and forest audits rather than cadastral land tenure use, which USAID, for example, is employing. How can the applications that USAID has developed be obtained, and where would one go to find them?
Yeah, another question is.
So on the use of smartphones, so a lot of the mobile applications to secure tenure type applications are piloted on smartphones. So in terms of obtaining or being able to test some solutions, those are available. There are also some complementary type application that could be of interest for land valuation that are widely available for use on smartphones on different platforms even. So those can definitely be provided in terms of, there's a whole range of options there available for testing right now. I think the data platforms are quite different. Some of them require like users to agree to make data publicly available, and some of them have like a test instance or secure option. So I think the way the data is hosted is quite different.
Just follow up. I think the question is you already own those solutions or is it a contract? Sure. So I had a similar question, and it wasn't quite answered so that I understood it. So you said that USAID has mobile application solutions that are being used currently, right, on pilots. Tanzania mentioned several times. And I think that for me, it's I have an application and I want to get access to that mobile solution. Who do I talk to get it? Do I talk to USAID, or do I talk to a contractor USAID hired to build the solution?
Sure. So if we're talking about mobile applications that are being tested, it depends which type of mobile application are you talking about, the customary land tenure examples. So there's a whole host of applications. And information about that, including how to obtain and test them in the field, is available on a USAID land tenure portal. So that's.
And certainly in regard to MAST, it's an open source tool that's up on GitHub, so you could download, use, etc.
That's good.
Thank you. I'm wondering, when you do community mapping and community surveys, do you ever also ask about the social information, or you just prefer the land title information?
So what kind of, voluntary geographic information is a kind of useful for the useful for the land administration purposes. Is that what you intend to ask? Okay.
So this is so male or female, all the applicants, information on all the applicants is gathered based on the land tenure, based on the land administration domain model or the social tenure domain model. The information that is contained, that is the information that is also gathered during the community mapping. Right. So gender, poverty.
From my experience, it really varies on a case-by-case basis. You know, once people find out you're doing a door-to-door survey, it seems more questions keep getting added into the data set, so it can really vary.
People want to tell you everything. Yes.
My name is Paul Cook. I'm an independent consultant here in the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm a water resources engineer by training. And my question has to do with how you see or anticipate these digital technologies affecting water resources management.
How the different technologies affecting the water resources management.
Sure. I must admit a little bit of ignorance in regards to the water sector, and certainly something I need to learn quite a bit about because it is so critical to property rights, and as everyone in this room knows, it's only going to be growing in importance in the coming years. That said, I probably don't have a great insight right now.
I don't think you can really separate in certain contexts. The land and water resources are tied together. So I think it's a package of rights.
Depends on if you're in a distributed system where you have amenities being shown. So based on the jurisdiction or the country, and they choose to model that, then it can be facilitated.
Okay, Carol, you have some questions from the online audience?
Thank you. I think I'm going to do two at once, if that's okay for the panel. The first question from Dr. David Stanfield out at the Terra Institute, who notes that there are many groups developing software for the administration of land records. Have any of you seen criteria that have been developed to evaluate those different software tools? If there are standards, who's setting standards to tell us what's good and what's good or maybe good enough in terms of the software? So that's the first question. The second question, this is for all the panelists, and it's coming in from Mr. Solomon Humlong, who's in the Ministry of Lands and Surveys in Jos in Plateau State, Nigeria, where Lisa has done a lot of work. He's asking the panelists, aside from technology, what other strategies do you suggest to raise awareness about the need for land rights security? Thank you.
Okay, maybe we'll take the first question first about the standards. How do we determine what is the right kind of a software? What are the standards that who is putting forward the standards?
The Open Geospatial Consortium, they're the persons now talking about standards in terms of land infrastructure standards, water standards, standards for metadata. So they're like a non-profit organization who are there. They have different conferences around the world that you can participate in and try to get onto their domain working groups. It's openspatial.org. So if you look at that website, you'll be able to access all information in terms of standards. Right. Second question?
Interoperability standards are very, very important, as Lisa mentioned. I believe in terms of the criteria to evaluate the software tools, it depends on the needs assessment document and how well the software really meets the requirements of developing. So it will really depend on that documentation, proper documentation of the needs and requirements. Yes.
Okay. Perhaps just to add to that and tackle the second question as well. While I don't know that there's a specific tool for evaluating the range of softwares, another certification to keep in mind is the International Standards Organization Certified Land Administration Domain Model, which I think was just passed maybe 3 years ago. And it's subset the social tenure domain model, which will at least ensure that data can be transferred between systems if you move from one system to another down the road. In regards to that public education, I would certainly agree that it's a critical component of any land intervention, regardless of whether it's a tech or a policy or a legal intervention. But really making sure to inform the public of the importance of property rights, and not just in the urban centers, but across the nation.
Okay, and that brings us to the second question in terms of what are the aspects, what are the strategies that really one need to keep in mind, I mean, going beyond the technology to make this technology a success? Yeah.
Legislation.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing aerial mapping. They're seeing planes flying. They're like, you know, what's going on? So we need that, and that's the improved governance along with technology, right? Because we can't implement a manual system now, can we?
Yeah. Your take and your experience on this?
I think Lisa's absolutely right. I also think involving very strong involvement from the local governments, very, very important in capacity building to making technology implementation a success. As Lisa said at the beginning, it's not all about technology. It's a complex set of implementation challenges that you have to address upfront.
Frank, in your opening remarks, you also mentioned that technology is not a panacea. It has in terms of the governance, in terms of the capacities. And all. Would you like to elaborate on this count?
Sure. Certainly, as my co-panelists have mentioned, that need for training of end users is so critical. Long-term thinking about how software or hardware will be maintained. Oftentimes it's funded by a project, and the project ends and there's no longer a budget to maintain, replace, update hardware and software, all of which has a short shelf life. And then finally, that fundamental governance. Do people believe that the government registry is trustworthy? Do they believe it's worth the cost of paying a fee that could be 10, 20, 50, 100% of what the property value is to register that property?
Okay. Carol, any more questions for us from online audience?
I do have some more.
Okay.
Thank you. This is a question that came in from Jamal Brown over Twitter. How challenging have institutional and legal barriers been to integrating mobile technology in land information management projects?
And I think I mentioned briefly in my remarks, it was somewhat of a surprise when in Tanzania the government was willing to issue customary certificate rights of occupancy. In most places, it's not legally valid to collect on a mobile phone or even a GPS. You'll often see survey plans in emerging economies that tie back to a reference point that has been laid down. Well, oftentimes, the surveyor never really went to that reference point. They know where it is on the map, and they tie their GPS coordinates back to it. So it's somewhat of a well-known secret that GPS is being used, but they're pretending it's being used through the old theodolites and total stations.
Okay. Any questions from the audience over here? Yes, Carol.
So I have one more online, and I'm glad this comment came in. Otherwise, I would have crafted a sort of similar comment. Coming in from Sally O over Twitter. In the context of the Day of Women in Science, how can women participate more actively in connecting technology and land rights, and perhaps especially in the global South?
Lisa, would you like to take that?
Third question.
Sorry?
What's the question?
Carol, would you mind repeating the question, please?
So I think a question about how, there can be gendered differences in terms of how you access and use technology. And so how do you think, especially in a context, this is the Day of Women in Science, how can women participate more actively in maybe using or connecting to technology to secure land rights? And if you have any thoughts about how that how that can be done in the global south. That might be a helpful way to frame the responses. Thank you.
So I can bring up the example, as Kel knows well, from Tanzania, where through the use of community intermediaries, the data collection was organized really to a crowdsourcing type of effort. And so the women's participation as part of that effort was instrumental, because this was a very participatory type of effort. Women had the opportunity to be trained equally in the use of technology, and were actually extremely enthusiastic, I would say, as trusted intermediaries. So that example, I think it's a great one of showing really the increased access to technology just from providing a participatory option for data collection. So I think that plays into what Frank was saying about democratization of data collection, of mapping your rights, really. And I think in the case of Tanzania, we've seen there's evidence there that a women's participation was very important, and it really contributed to increase awareness about local land rights for women. So I believe that's a very important question.
Maybe just to expand a little bit on that, certainly women in using and being involved in technology is something we try to promote, and I would say the land sector is as guilty as any sector in not having women involved. Some female surveyors at the US.
No, it was just.
Yeah, I'm working in a lot of government survey offices. It's very rare to see women, but through programs and interventions like the work in Tanzania, the donor community is working to ensure that women are involved in that process of data collection, and we can only advocate for when data is being collected in the field to make sure to speak to men and women. And I'd expand that to not just being involved with the technology, but making sure they're involved with the property rights, that there are equitable laws around land rights that are being enforced. And that there's been examples in Kosovo, USAID did a program that had a soft incentive, so decreased taxes when a property was registered and the husband and wife's name were on the property, which was not a cultural norm, although it was a legal obligation. It was interesting to see that soft incentive really change people's mindsets.
Okay, I have a question at this point. You talked about the data collection aspects, and you've been talking about very new technologies being tested, whether it's mobile or UAVs platforms for data collection aspects of it. And the prospect these new and latest technologies provide are very tempting in terms of the scalability, the reliability aspects, and also the security aspects of it. So in terms of I mean, an example, a very successful example, going beyond going beyond the examples that you have cited. In general, how do you see the awareness towards using and trying these new and latest technologies in different geographies across the world? A question to all the participants.
Yeah, it has been embraced in especially areas that the penetration of ICT is very low. Mm-hmm. The fascination of it, although it wears off, but the fascination of it starting out, it's very impressive in terms of, they're actually receptive of technology being used for land rights.
Okay, even without precedent in using the technology.
No.
Okay, how's been your experience, Frank?
Yeah, very similar. So there's very much an interest in using technology. As we all know, mobile phone penetration is only increasing. So people have at least a baseline relation to technology and only want to expand on that. People around the world recognize that it is the future.
So have you seen really situations or cases where this enthusiasm and this interest and excitement has really translated into a very concrete results for the project? Did you?
Let me think on that for a moment.
From my side, yes. For the project in Plateau,
Okay,
that 9 months had a lot to do with persons really accepting the technology and the capacity building. It wasn't that great in terms of moving to different areas, or capacity building takes a little bit longer. But in terms of the needs assessment, the business process engineering, they were all apt. They're all ready. The stakeholders' participation was really impressive. They were really.
I believe that's definitely true. It's it does increase awareness of technology, and I think the sector continues to adapt to the improved internet access, improved tools, improved data storage. I believe that people are really increasingly aware that technology exists and that it can be an enabler.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So that brings me to, we have a question from the audience.
Hi, Frank, you touched on a little bit on taxation in the previous question. I'm curious to know how the advent in technology is impacting land valuation itself. Because my experience has been that, particularly with developing countries, that when it comes to valuing land, I mean, it's somewhat a bit arbitrary.
That's a very good point. Land valuation is oftentimes a manual process, which opens it up to be an extremely corrupt process. When someone is going door to door to value a property, based on the amount of lunch money they might have, that might change their perceived value of the property or how it's assessed. But I would say that's a key area where the use of technology can really bring equity and transparency into the valuation process. No longer would it just be a number that's assigned or a rate that's assigned for your yearly ground rent or tax, but you have a process that makes you understand that, okay, I was taxed this based on construction materials, square footage, overall size of the property, and so.
Okay. Yes,
I
sure.
have a question. We've talked a lot about kind of what's possible now and looking at some recent examples of how things are changing. But looking ahead 10, 15, 20 years in the future, what would you see as really success in this sector? And then kind of working backwards from there, what do you think are some of the key milestones or enabling pieces that we need to get in order to achieve that success? So what's a vision of a really great world in terms of technology in the land sector 10, 15, 20 years from now? And how do we get there?
Wow, Jeremy, you want to solve the world's problems. A very good question. And from my perspective, and I think this would be reflected based on my experience with Cadasta Foundation, there's a recognition that there are a lot of governments that simply aren't there in terms of the ability to govern rural areas, and are, as a result, that huge number of people left out of the formal system. So for those, my vision of success for Cadasta is, can we begin to document those people's rights, even if they are informal, and build up a critical mass so that those rights begin to be treated as de facto rights that are recognized. The government has no choice but to say, well, all of these land claims are here, we need to really sort this out. And many of them can then be brought into the formal system.
I would also add that really bringing that land transparency out in the open, if you want, would be really important going forward. So having the information about land be available in all the decisions that are being made, because the land formality, information about land formality, information about land valuation, that's not currently available in many places for investments, for anything, even development programs. So having that land transparency piece be there, having land be a part of the conversation through this information, through this improved information, would be really interesting to see. And it's a very exciting time to see that technology might enable that, increase awareness.
I would say open platforms. where we're all, you know, a product, mass product being used by Thomson Reuters, Cadasta, we're all in one, you know, open platform kind of scenario. That's where I see this heading. So if you've done a project somewhere, I can go in, use the data. That's the system.
Okay, Carol, do we have any questions coming in?
We have a comment and then one final question from the online audience. So the comment first is from Stephen Calder at Adam Smith over in the UK. And he points out that theoretically high accuracy isn't necessary for registering land. Rather, it may be necessary for erecting buildings. And so the comment is one way to address geospatial accuracy around land rights might be to adopt a grading system where you'd have survey grade, mapping grade, and recreational grade. And for registering maybe much land around the world, all that might be necessary is mapping grade accuracy and not survey grade accuracy. And I think that's a nice point to make. And then the final question that I have from the online audience is related to an issue that Frank addressed earlier. This is again from David Stanfield out at Terra Institute, and he notes that community-based land administration, which requires computers, can be difficult to sustain without funding, electricity, secure locations, etc. So what are your tips for improving sustainability in those kinds of situations? And Frank had mentioned cloud computing as one option, but you may have other recommendations related to sustainability.
So
Yes, Frank.
Well, first, thanks to Stephen for that comment. I think we're all in agreement with it. In regards to that question of sustainability, it really gets back to that idea of fit for purpose, because I think we've all seen programs that tried something that was perhaps overambitious for the context and not recognizing that there's power surges that are going to fry computers. There's a lack of sustainable or reliable internet or high cost of internet. All of these things that might make a project fail post donor support. So all I can really say is making sure to use fit for purpose approaches, but also recognizing that there is greater and greater tech penetration, particularly through mobile phone networks and smartphone usage.
I would add that definitely that's where the local government come into play as well, because it can be community-based, but the information on land administration would be maintained at the local or central level. So the involvement of the government in that land administration system is critical, in my opinion.
Any questions from the audience? Here. Okay, I have one last question to all the panelists here. We do agree the need for having a effective land administration, considering the fact that the need for food security, the need to have a sustainable development, and also in view of the recent announcement from the United Nations about the Sustainable Development Goals, there are clear-cut targets that need to be achieved on all those fronts. So definitely to achieve those fronts, it starts with land and having an effective land administration system. So as I see, as a media person, there is an urgent need to quicken the process of existing systems towards to meet those goals. So, and as we see also, not many countries, only about probably about 50 countries are actively working on modernizing their land systems. So at this point in time, the onus is on who would need to be taking the onus and create more awareness and give hand-holding to the countries and the implementing organizations. Does the buck stop on government? People who are as enablers of new and latest technologies, do we have a role to play in educating the people as well?
Because the public outreach I saw in Plateau that really transformed how persons thought about land rights in terms of how they submitted their documents, they know now that, it's online portal, they should submit their documents that way versus coming into the office and trying to pinpoint one or two persons who they can ask a question, put in information online, that they can access it if they have power and if they have internet. So one of my tips.
Your perspective?
Sure. I do think there's growing recognition of that importance of property rights, and certainly the endorsement of the voluntary guidelines a couple of years went a long way towards catalyzing that interest. And in the wake of that, seeing a global donor working group on land only helps improve coordination and show that there's a consistent message being pushed, as consistent as a message can be for multiple governments, I suppose. But also from my perspective, there comes a time when maybe you can't wait for governments because the process is so slow, because there might be changing the system. So can we provide an alternative in a way to document rights that might be outside of the formal system, but at least are increasing tenure security?
Lana, your take.
I definitely believe that there's a role for the technology developers to get the message out. Whenever there are advances, whenever there are definitely lessons learned, that's why it's important to have the community of land technologists, I believe, to share those experiences, to see what works. I think, as I mentioned, it's a very exciting time. There are constantly new advances in technology, and with respect especially to data interoperability, I think that there's still room to grow, and I think we need to get those messages out there that the examples are there, what works, what doesn't work, and new options, new solutions. I think it's important to put it out there for people.
Okay, great.
In terms of implementing these technologies, we have to ensure that they're sustainable, in that, it's the same system being used over and over. It's scalable and it's secure from viruses, attackers. Everybody's on GitHub, so anything can happen. Yeah.
So that's great. Quite an engrossing discussion, I should say. And just to wrap up, everybody are on the same page that there is a great need to use the latest technology tools and to bring about a lot of transparency and to bring the security aspects into the land administration system. So at the same time, we need to ensure these technologies are really sustainable and sustainably managed and updated, so that the long-term goals of implementing these projects are really realized. And we have cited several examples from countries where these tools have been successfully implemented and the goals, the benefits are being reaped. But at the same time, we do agree that technology in itself is not a panacea, but a lot of supporting factors, whether it is the policy and the implementing agencies, the capacities, the availability of technology per se. So several of these factors are really make a technology successful, and the onus lies on several of these stakeholding organizations and stakeholding participants in these projects. So that's something to wrap up the conversation today we have. Thank you so much for participating in this conversation on the land rights issues. We continue to converse on these issues and debate, because this is the most important topic of our generation, or probably forever. Thank you so much.